We're going to talk about taxation today, and we're going to move through it fairly quickly to make sure that we cover everything. We go back to 1784 when Adam Smith offered us the four maxims of taxation. The first one being equity and fairness. That is, a tax should be imposed on a citizen according to their ability to pay that tax. The tax should be imposed with certainty. That is, that should not be arbitrary. If you remember in the Bible, the tax collectors of Matthew's day were not very looked upon favorably because they would impose more tax than the government required of taxpayers, and then they would keep the excess. The maxim of the convenience of payment, that is, the state should allow for tax planning. We should have to pay our taxes when it's assumed that we are able to. And then economy and collection, that is, the government should collect taxes in an efficient manner and take only what they need to continue operations. Let's look back, let's look at the progressive and regressive tax rates. The guiding principle here is Adam Smith's comment of in proportion to their respective abilities, and the scriptural admonition to whom much is given, much is required. In a progressive tax structure, the taxpayer pays more according to how much their income is. The higher their income goes, the greater the proportion of income tax they must pay. In a regressive tax structure, the poor taxpayer pays a greater proportion of his or her means than the wealthier taxpayer. That is, as an example, all consumption taxes, sales tax, excise tax, value-added tax are regressive structures because at some point the wealthy no longer consumes, but they invest. If I make more than I consume, then I will invest the rest, and I don't pay taxes on those investments. Income tax was established in 1913 by the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, and it is the fiscal policy tool of Congress and other governments with the authority to impose an income tax. A lot of states impose income tax. They can exclude certain types of income from taxation. They can provide deductions from income for certain types of expenses. They provide tax credits, and they impose additional taxes to encourage or discourage certain spending behaviors. That's the whole notion of fiscal policy. Those become important aspects of taxation as we move into the marginal versus effective tax rates discussion. The marginal rate is imposed on every dollar above a certain amount, okay, and so that is the incremental rate imposed on the incremental income. We group incomes according to brackets, and if you earn between $25,000 and $50,000, you may be in the 25% bracket. That means all of the income earned within that bracket is taxed at 25%. If you drop into a lower bracket, you will be taxed at a lower percent, perhaps 15%. If you go over $50,000 in our example, then you'll pay a greater amount. If you notice, in 1913, when the income tax was imposed, the maximum rate was about 8%. Shortly thereafter, we went into World War I, and the government needed more money, and so they raised the marginal rate quite high, almost 80%. In World War II, and during Franklin Roosevelt's time as president, we had rates exceeding 90% to support not only pulling out of the Great Depression, but then also ramping up for World War II. They stayed up there until almost the end of the Vietnam War, and Then it was dropped down to 70% as the maximum rate. Reagan came into office and dropped the maximum rate down to about 50%, and then still lower down to under 30%. Now, we've talked about the marginal rate. Now let's talk about the effective tax rate. Obviously, I said that if you are, as your income is low, you're going through low tax brackets. But as your income increases, your maximum nominal rate goes up. Even looking back to when it was in the 90% range, nobody really ever paid more than about 50%, maybe even less than that in the 40s, because you get to avail of all the tax attributes of the lower brackets. You get the exclusions, the deductions, and the tax credits that drops your effective rate down quite a bit. For the example, I looked up Amazon, and in 2020, when the maximum corporate tax rate was 21%, Amazon paid an effective rate of only 7.9% in cash taxes. Consumption taxes include sales taxes. We'll start with that. There's no federal sales tax. They're imposed by state and local jurisdictions. Texas imposes 6.25% sales tax, and local jurisdictions can impose an additional 2% for a combined sales tax of 8.25%, which is what we pay here in Houston. The excise tax is imposed on specific types of items, and they're for specific purposes. The most prominent excise taxes in Texas are on cigarettes and alcohol, the so-called sin taxes. And then we also impose a fairly stiff excise tax on motor fuels to support the building of roads. Some jurisdictions impose excise tax on luxury items like high-dollar jewelry, yachts, or expensive cars. Now, there's also a value-added tax. This is also a consumption tax. It's imposed on lots of countries instead of an income tax. It's a tax on sales, and it's added at every stage of manufacture or processing, based on the value added at each stage. In general, the VAT taxes individuals and not businesses. So they pass these value-added taxes through to the consumers, and they don't have to pay anything. They reclaim what they had to pay in income or in value-added tax as a credit from the government. Qatar has a value-added rate of 20%. There is some call in this country to switch from an income tax to a value-added tax. But again, this is a regressive tax imposed on poor people more than it is on wealthy people. Let's move on to death and gift taxes. The estate tax is imposed at the federal level. Some states impose an estate tax, and it is imposed on the deceased's estate. That is, if the estate exceeds $11.7 million. After that, the marginal rates start at 18% and go up very rapidly to 40%. Some states also impose an inheritance tax that is imposed on those who receive inheritance from the estate. We don't impose one here in Texas. Some wealthy parents have tried to avoid death taxes by giving their wealth to their children before they die. To close the loophole, the federal government imposes the gift tax, where each person can only give away $15,000, that is the amount today, without incurring gift tax consequences. So, for example, a couple can give each child $30,000. So dad can give son $15,000, mom can give son $15,000 for a total of $30,000. And then if the son is married, each parent can give the son's spouse, the daughter-in-law, an additional $15,000 each. And so they've transferred $60,000 to their married son and daughter-in-law without depleting any of their lifetime exclusion. Let's look at ad valorem tax, typically called property taxes. In Texas, what we do is impose a tax. All of our taxing jurisdictions impose a real estate tax or property tax per $100 worth of valuation. And so if the city imposes a tax rate of $1.25 and the property is worth $100,000, the taxpayer will pay $1,250 in property taxes that year. Cities and counties, school districts can also impose ad valorem taxes on machinery, equipment, inventories, other business, personal properties. Jurisdictions also offer exemptions, such as homestead exemptions, ag use exemptions for farmland or crops and animal growing. They also impose or can offer exemptions for disabled veterans, elderly homeowners, and for charitable organizations. We come to severance tax, and that's imposed on the extractive industries such as oil and gas, mining, or the commercial lumber industry. So whenever you pull oil and gas out of the ground, you have to pay a severance tax on that, and that is a tax for exploiting a jurisdiction's natural resources. They give you the privilege of doing that. There's also a transfer tax imposed by the taxing authority on the transfer of property title from one owner to another. You pay it on whenever you buy or sell a car. You'll pay a transfer tax whenever you buy or sell real estate. And so that's the transfer tax. Wealth and the minimum tax may be imposed, but we don't have a wealth tax in this country. It would be similar to an ad valorem tax, but there has been a call for that when the news broke about Warren Buffett gaining a tremendous amount of wealth during this last year and paying less than 1% on that increase in wealth. Well, again, that is the wealth he gained by the value of his investments increasing. And we don't have that kind of tax in this country. We have tried to solve it by imposing an alternative minimum tax. When you avail of all kinds of tax credits and deductions, the alternative minimum tax says, look, you've got to pay at least 20%, and so some individuals have to pay the AMT. There's also a minimum tax being talked about among nations, and that would be to prevent people from shopping, or companies from shopping for tax havens. And Janet Yellen of our Treasury Department has gotten agreement in principle by a lot of countries to impose at least 15%. There's a race to the bottom, trying to, as countries try to give more tax breaks to entice corporations to locate there, bringing new jobs and wealth. But look at the chart on the next slide. Let's look at this chart on the bottom left. If you'll notice, Ireland has the lowest of all corporate tax rates, about 10%. And the United States is up around 31% or 38% back in 2010. Now it's 21%. But we were very high on the corporate tax rates. The upper right-hand chart shows that same picture, where we're up near the top, just behind Colombia, imposing high corporate tax rates. Again, now we're down to 21%, and so hopefully, people are a little bit happier. That's it for taxation. We're going to have to stop for now, and we'll talk later.